Hi guys, Queen of Flannel here. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to episode 1 of How I Color. So I thought it would be fun to put together some little quick tip videos for you guys. And for the first one, because this is a topic that I have seen come up a few places, I thought we would tackle coloring / painting hair in adult coloring. So I'm going to be working on this image from Christine Karen. This is a steampunk grayscale. I will link to the image to Christine's Etsy shop in the description below. I am using my Winsor & Newton Cotman paints because I know that my umbers and my black on this set aren't granulating. I don't want that texture, and my Daniel Smith paints, the colors that I'm using that I have in that set are granulating paints, so I don't quite want that texture for this. I'm going to be working with my burnt umber and a little bit of lamp black later on. I'm also using, to start off with, my size 10 Craft & Mo brush, which you guys will get to hear more about later on this week for Watercolor Wednesday. So the first thing that we are going to do is a light wash over the whole this whole section of hair. So this is going to be, I got too much water on my brush. This is going to act as our highlight color, our base layer. And it's really not much different than working with pencils, aside from the fact that we are working with a wet medium. We're still going to be working in layers, so we want to make sure that this first layer is just as a light wash. So what I did was more water in my paint mixture, a higher water to pigment ratio in my pan, not on my brush. So even though I went over into my water cup, I rinsed off some of that pigment, I still want to make sure that my brush is not overly saturated with water. And I recommend using a larger brush for your initial washes. The less times that you have to dip your brush into your paint and into your water, the better. You'll get a more consistent color over your image for your base wash. And the other thing to keep in mind is that your watercolor is going to dry lighter than how it looks when you first apply it. And as you're starting out and you're learning and adjusting to loading your brush and how much pigment you have on, when you first touch your brush to your paper, I recommend starting in your darker areas and blending out into your highlight, dragging your paint out into your lighter area. Okay, so we've got our base layer down, and for this we want to make sure that each layer is dry before we move on to the next. So I'm going to hit this with my little Ranger Crafted tool just to make sure that it's dry. before I move on. And then I'm gonna swap to a smaller brush for this next step. The back of the paper just for good measure. All right, so that should be good. And for the next few steps, I'm going to swap to my size 4 for some of my detailing. And as we work our way through this, I should probably wet that first. We are building up our color in small layers, and we're going to be adding pigment in less and less areas as we go. So I'm working in some of my darker areas, but I still just want a really light build up. I'm adding a little darker color to some of these lines right here. And the other thing that you can do is, let me see what I've got here. To blend out some of your edges is take a clean, damp brush with no pigment on it, just a little bit of water, and use it to blend out some of those maybe a little harsher edges there. And we're just adding into our shadows. And for some of these little wisps, I'm just kind of flicking the brush as I come through here. I'm just working my way down. And we can always go in with our damp brush and blend out some of these harsher areas. In this still gives us a little bit of texture just by doing this little flicking motion here. And in a couple of these spots, just barely touching the paper with the brush. And you get some of that texture too if you kind of a dry brush technique in here for some of these areas. Just gives it a little extra texture in there. And it's okay if it is, if there's variation in your color in different areas. It doesn't need to be perfect, because if you think about it, highlights and light hitting the hair, you're going to have all sorts of different tones. So I can go a little darker in here because that's going to be one of my darker areas anyways. And just take our time. And like I said, when you first touch your brush to your paper, start in your darker area and work into your light. And it is much easier to build your color up in light layers than it is to go in too dark, because yes, you can lift watercolor, but only so much. You can always add, but there is a limit to how much you can take away. Just trying to get in here in a couple areas where I want it a little darker, and then I'm going to use my damp brush to blend out some of um these edges. We'll hit it with the drying tool, and then we should be able to go back in with our final layer. And you can even, like in some of these highlight areas, add a little bit more color back in if there's spots where you think maybe it was a little too light. And all right, so let's see if I have a smaller brush here for this. All right, so let's swap to the size 3. And I'm just going in with water right now. Just smoothing out some of these edges and bringing some of the spots where maybe I got a little too much color or where it just looks a little funky to me, dragging some of that out into the highlighted area. And sometimes as I do this too, I'll catch areas where I maybe missed some color. And I'm using very little water for um my actual, like, with my can't talk, words are hard, guys. My brush is pretty dry. I'm basically just adding a little bit of water, just to keep the brush moving nicely over the paper. But so go back in and blend some of this out. So this right here is no pigment, just a damp brush to soften up some of these edges and push around some of that that pigment. And I like working with grayscale images for this because it gives you your highlight and your in your shadow areas, and I find that tends to help when it kind of trains your eye, so when you're working on an image that doesn't have those um pre those given shadows and highlights for you, like how you can read the image like on your own. I just find it helps me approach other images that way. I am gonna blend that out. Little much. All right, I'm gonna hit it with the heat tool again. And now I am going to mix in a little bit of my lamp black, just a tiny bit. Okay, a little more. A little more. And this mixture is going to be my darkest mixture. That might not have been quite dry yet. You want to be careful that your page is dry when you do this, because if it's not, then you lose some of your hair texture doing wet on wet. Really, I only want this, want it darkest up underneath the hat, and I'll go in and blend these out. And there we go, at the tip of the brush in there. And just these really like deep crevice type areas. of the hair. Yeah, so this top part of my brush was a little too wet. And this dark layer is really just going to be in these little like cracks. Flick that out a little bit. And I'm basically just using my paint mixture and the moisture that's already in the paint, and essentially using that to keep my brush damp instead of going into my rinse cup. And like I said, as we progress, we're going to be adding pigment to less and less of our picture here. And this detail brush really works very well for getting these tiny little areas. This is the size 3 Craftimo brush here. And you could really go as dark as you wanted. I could add more black if I wanted, and really just darken these shadow areas up. But since this is supposed to be a quick video and just an overview of how I would approach coloring hair in this picture, add just a little bit of and I'm going to take my detail brush and just add some definition to these little strands right here. Barely touching the paper here. There, add some definition back in there. And all right, so let's just take our damp brush and just do a little bit of blending here. Don't want to do too much. I don't want to lose my details that I just put in. And this is just kind of softening things up. So you don't want to like scrub your brush. You just kind of want to like dab in these little areas, like right on the edge, with just a damp brush. You don't want it to be like super saturated. Just kind of blend some of those edges out. Yeah. And I think that looks pretty cute. You know, you could take this as far as you want. You could, you know, build up more color and get even darker with this if you chose to, but I think for what we're going for today that this is a pretty good idea of how I would approach coloring hair in a picture like this. So, with that being said, thank you guys so much for checking out the video. And if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you would like to see more of this, please let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell to get notified when I post additional content, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thank you.